Every railway station feels the same, a place of waiting, of passing through. But there are some stations that feel different, colder, heavier, as if the air itself is holding its breath. The truth is, not everyone who arrives on the last train ever leaves. Some linger in the tunnels, in the empty carriages, in the forgotten corners where the lights flicker but never go out. They say if you listen closely, you can hear them. The whispers under the announcements, the footsteps, pacing just a little too close, the cry of a voice that doesn't belong to the living. Tonight, we will step into those places. The 12 most haunted railway stations in the world, where the line between the living and the dead has worn thin. Each story you'll hear comes from those who swore they saw it, heard it, or felt it. And once you know their stories, you'll never stand on a platform the same way again. Welcome to Farcical Fears. If you're brave enough to take this journey with me, subscribe now, and remember, once you board this train, there may be no getting off. Let's move to our first story. I never thought I would be the one to tell this, and if I'm honest, I almost didn't. For years I kept it locked away, because every time I tried to explain it, I could see the look on people's faces, that mixture of polite disbelief and discomfort, like they were humoring an old man losing his grip on reality. But I know what I saw. I know what I experienced. And once you've seen something like that, you never look at a railway station the same way again. I worked for British Rail for nearly 30 years. I started young, fresh out of school, back in the 1970s when the night shifts were long and lonely. Back then, you did everything yourself. You checked the platforms, you monitored the lights, you swept the waiting rooms. I grew used to the quiet hours, the times when the whole place felt abandoned except for me and the echo of my own footsteps. I always thought of stations as alive during the day and dead at night. I never realized how literal that thought might become. It happened in the winter of 1984, the coldest one I can remember. The frost clung to the windows, and the platforms shimmered under a skin of ice. I was on the late-night shift at an old regional station that's since been renovated, beyond recognition. Back then it was a tired, worn-down place, with peeling paint on the walls and benches that creaked when you sat down. The lamps flickered more often than they shone steadily, and the wind whistled through the cracks in the windows. It had a lonely charm to it, but that night, it felt like something else entirely. The last train was scheduled at 11:42 p.m., a near-empty service that rolled in from the city, usually carrying only a handful of passengers. Sometimes nobody at all. It was routine for me to meet it, step out onto the platform with my lantern, and wait until the carriage doors hissed open. The conductors were supposed to do a walkthrough, but sometimes they cut corners, and I'd check just to make sure. No stragglers were left behind. Most nights, I found nothing. Just an echo of warm air spilling from the train's interior before the driver closed the doors and pulled away. But this night, someone stepped off. I saw him clearly, under the dim glow of the platform lamp. A man in his mid-40s, maybe older, dressed in a long brown overcoat and holding a leather case. He looked weary, shoulders slumped, as though the weight of his journey pressed down on him. I remember the way his shoes clicked sharply against the icy concrete. There was nothing strange about him at first. In fact, he looked perfectly ordinary. Too ordinary, like someone pulled straight out of a photograph. He walked slowly, not toward the exit, but down the length of the platform. I called out, "Sir, this way, the exit's over here." But he didn't respond. His face was turned slightly downward, eyes fixed on the ground. I thought perhaps he was lost in thought or hard of hearing. I decided to follow him, my breath steaming in the cold air, my boots crunching against the frost. When I reached the end of the platform, he was gone. There was nowhere for him to have gone. No stairwell, no open doors, no gaps in the fence. Just an expanse of tracks, stretching out into the darkness. I shone my lantern in both directions, heart thumping with irritation more than fear. I thought he must have jumped down onto the tracks, which was dangerous and forbidden. So I hurried to the edge and peered down. Nothing. No footprints in the frost. No sign of movement. Just silence, broken only by the faint creak of the train as it sat waiting. I turned back, confused, and that was when I saw him again. He was standing at the opposite end of the platform, near the benches under the shelter. Exactly where I had been standing moments earlier. My blood ran cold. There was no way he could have moved that fast, not unless he sprinted, and even then, I would have heard him. But he was there, calm, motionless, his leather case resting. At his side, he wasn't looking at me. He was staring straight ahead, past the tracks, into the darkness. I shouted again, louder this time. "Sir, you need to leave the platform." My voice echoed strangely, bouncing back at me like I was yelling into an empty hall. The man didn't flinch, didn't move. For a moment, I considered walking back, but something deep in my gut told me not to. Something about the stillness of his posture, the way he seemed carved out of shadow, unnerved me. The conductor blew his whistle then, sharp and final. The train's doors slid shut, and the engine rumbled as it prepared to leave. I glanced back at the carriages, and for a moment, I swear I saw the same man, sitting inside, peering out of the window as the train pulled away, his face pale, expression blank. But when I whipped my head back toward the platform, he was still standing there. The train departed, disappearing into the night, leaving me alone with him. I gripped my lantern tighter, my mouth dry. I took a cautious step forward, my boots squeaking against the ice. The lamp above flickered, buzzing weakly. And then, he turned. It wasn't a sudden, jerky motion. It was slow, deliberate. His head tilted just enough for me to see his face clearly. Under the yellow glow, his eyes were empty. Not blind, not lifeless exactly, but hollow, like they were looking straight through me. His mouth twitched as if he wanted to speak, but no sound came out. Only a faint, rasping exhale that carried on the cold air. That was enough for me. I turned and bolted, nearly slipping on the frosted platform. I didn't stop running until I was back inside the station office, with the door locked behind me. My chest heaved, my skin prickled with sweat despite the chill. For several minutes I sat there, convincing myself I had imagined it. That exhaustion and the cold had played tricks on me. But then came the knock. 3 slow, deliberate raps on the office door. I froze, every muscle tensing. Nobody knocked that way. Not at that hour, not with the authority of someone who knew. I was inside. The sound was heavy, echoing through the thin wooden frame. I didn't move. I barely breathed. When I finally summoned the courage to look through the small, smeared window in the door, the platform beyond was empty. The rest of the night passed in a haze. I refused to leave the office until dawn. When my relief arrived in the morning, I tried to laugh it off, chalk it up to fatigue, but deep down I knew something had shifted, something I couldn't explain. I tried to put it behind me. Weeks went by, and I convinced myself it had been a one-time thing. Until one night, nearly a month later, I was called into the station master's office. He shut the door and handed me a file. Inside were several written complaints from passengers. They described a man matching the exact description of the figure I had seen. Long brown overcoat, leather case, middle-aged, weary face. Each complaint said the same thing. They saw him step off a train, and then vanish before their eyes. The station master looked pale as he told me, "You're not the only one." After that, the story spread quietly among the staff. The passenger, who never arrived, they called him. Some said he was the ghost of a man who had died in a derailment decades earlier. Others believed he was a lost soul, still waiting for a train that would never come. I don't pretend to know which is true. All I know is that I saw him, twice, and that was enough. I eventually requested a transfer. I told them I wanted a busier station, something to keep me occupied. But the truth was, I couldn't stand the silence anymore. Every flicker of the lamps, every echo of footsteps, sent shivers crawling up my spine. And even now, all these years later, when I find myself on a platform late at night, I can't help but scan the shadows. I look for him, half hoping and half dreading that I'll see him again. Because some passengers never arrive, and some never leave. Let's move to our story. The story of Locker 17 has circulated among railway enthusiasts, paranormal investigators, and night shift workers for decades. It begins as nothing more than a curiosity, a local rumor whispered among urban explorers, who once dared to break into the abandoned Eastwell railway station after its closure in the late 1980s. But the rumor grew teeth when an old tape recorder, battered and half broken, was discovered inside one of the staff lockers. The contents of that tape are what transformed a forgotten building into one of the most disturbing railway legends in Britain. I should warn you now, the voice on that tape was not meant to be heard by the public. It wasn't a broadcast. It wasn't a confession in the normal sense. It was the unraveling of a man's mind, a slow collapse captured in crackling audio over the course of several weeks. And once you listen to it, you can never really unhear it. The tape begins innocently enough. The voice is male, mid-30s by the sound of it, with the clipped, careful tone of a railway conductor, accustomed to announcements. He identifies himself, though his name has since been removed from every file that ever referenced him. The record only preserves the initials JM, he says. Test 1. This is JM. Log entry. Just making sure this thing records properly. They don't want us to keep these, but I like the sound of it. Keeps me company on the nights. You never really realize how long the tunnels feel until you're the only one walking through them. The first entries are casual, almost cheerful. JM speaks about his routine, checking the signals, monitoring the arrival times, inspecting empty carriages after the last passengers have departed. He mentions the loneliness of the job, but seems to embrace it, saying the silence helps him think. For a while it feels like nothing more than a man killing time with a tape recorder. But by the third entry, a different tone creeps in. It's funny, you get to know the rhythms of the place. The clanks, the drips, the hum of the transformers. Tonight, though, I heard something else. Voices, at least I thought they were voices. Might have been kids outside, but they sounded too close, like they were inside the tunnel with me. Not words exactly, just fragments. I called out, but of course, nobody answered. The fourth entry is shorter, quieter. The conductor sounds unsettled. Heard them again, this time clearer. A woman maybe, singing. Not a tune I know. Can't get it out of my head now. I even checked the old PA system to make sure it wasn't bleeding through from somewhere. It wasn't. I don't know where it's coming from. Days pass between recordings. When he returns, his voice is strained, tired. Something's wrong here. Last night, I locked every door before heading down to the tunnel. When I came back, locker 17 was open. Wide open. I don't use that locker. Nobody does. Not since Wilson. I shut it, turned the key, tested it twice. But when I came back later, it was open again. And inside, I swear to God, there was a case. Leather, old. I didn't touch it. Just closed the door and left. I don't know how it got there. At this point, the tape develops a static hiss that grows worse with each entry. Some believe the damage came from storage. Others insist it was something else interfering with the recording. By entry 7. JM has changed entirely. His sentences are fragmented, his breath uneven. She's here every night now. The singing, it follows me. Doesn't matter where I go. Locker room, tunnel, even the office. Always behind me, never ahead. I tried to tell Carter, but he just laughed. Said I was hearing the wind in the tunnels. It's not the wind. Wind doesn't call your name. The next recording is nearly unlistenable. His voice is faint, trembling. You can hear his hand tapping against the recorder like he's too afraid to stop moving. Locker 17. It was open again. The case is still. There only now it's wet, dripping. I don't want to look, but I can smell it. Like rust, like iron. Blood, maybe. I'm not imagining it. I asked around, but everyone acts like I'm crazy. I don't think they can see it. Only me. The entries grow increasingly disjointed. In one, he mutters prayers under his breath, whispering that the tunnels are too long, too deep, too hungry. In another, he describes seeing a shadow following him that never makes a sound. He says he left the locker room, and when he returned, the leather case was gone, only to find it placed neatly beside his chair. In the office, weeks pass in the chronology. The final entries are almost impossible to decipher without headphones. The tape is warped, the voice breaking into static, but fragments remain. She's in the carriage with me. Empty, all empty, but I see her reflection. She's not behind me, only in the glass. The locker won't shut anymore. No matter how hard I slam it, the case is always there, waiting. I can't leave. The doors don't open. I've tried every exit, but the train keeps moving. The lights keep flickering. I think I died already. The very last words on the tape are whispered so faintly they barely register. She wants me in the case, and then silence. The tape cuts abruptly, leaving only the hiss of static. When the urban explorers found the recorder in the late 1990s, they assumed it was some elaborate prank left behind by staff. They even laughed as they played it back. Until one of them pointed out that Locker 17 was still there, jammed shut with rust, but undeniably real. They forced it open, only to find it completely empty. At least, that's what they said in interviews later. Yet two of the explorers who handled the locker complained for weeks afterward of a strange smell clinging to their clothes, like metal and rot that wouldn't wash away. Rumors spread quickly. Some claimed JM had gone mad and vanished, that he was institutionalized and silenced by the railway company. Others said he never existed at all, that the tape was a hoax. But those who worked at Eastwell before its closure whispered a different story. They remembered Wilson, the man who used Locker 17 before JM, a guard who was found dead in the tunnels under mysterious circumstances. His personal effects, they said, had been sealed in his locker and never retrieved. When the station was finally demolished in 2003, Locker 17 was removed and scrapped with the rest of the furniture. Yet sightings of the figure described on the tape, a pale woman singing in the tunnels, have persisted at the new station built on the site. Late-night staff sometimes hear her voice drifting across the platform when no one is there. Security guards refuse to patrol alone after dark. And, most chilling of all, some claim the new staff lockers occasionally swing open by themselves, even when locked. Always the 17th one. What unsettles me most is not the tape itself, but the timing. When researchers analyzed the background noise on the recordings, they discovered faint station announcements, distorted by static but still recognizable. Some of those announcements referenced trains that weren't scheduled until years after JM supposedly made the tapes, as if the voice on that recorder was bleeding through time itself, trapped in an endless loop of arrivals and departures. If you ask me, the truth of Locker 17 isn't about one man or one case. It's about the station itself. Some places aren't meant to be built where they are. Some tunnels run through more than earth and stone. They cut through memory, through death, through something older than either. And when you open the wrong door, or the wrong locker, you don't just find what was left behind. You find what was waiting. The tape was found. It was played. It was copied and archived. But the original recorder, that disappeared. The explorers said they left it behind in the tunnels. When they went back for it years later, it was gone. No trace of it, no sign it ever existed. Just silence. And yet, sometimes, on nights when the station is at its quietest, when the trains have stopped and the platforms lie empty, staff say they can still hear it. A faint crackling static, like an old tape hissing from inside the lockers. Sometimes, if you're unlucky, you'll hear more than static. You'll hear a voice, breathing, waiting, whispering the same words JM whispered before he vanished. She wants me in the case, and then, nothing. Let's move to our story. The railway station was small and unremarkable, yet it carried a reputation whispered among locals, the legend of the woman on the tracks. For decades, commuters and station staff reported sightings of a pale woman, often dressed in black, appearing on the tracks and vanishing moments before trains arrived. Those who saw her described a profound sorrow emanating from her presence, as if the grief of a century had settled onto the platform itself. I first encountered the case as a rookie police officer assigned to night patrols. I was told to treat it like any ordinary duty, check for trespassers, ensure safety, and monitor the empty platforms. At first, I dismissed the stories as local superstition. That disbelief vanished the night I first heard about her directly from the station master. He described seeing the woman late at night, standing near the far end of the platform. He initially thought she was a lost passenger, but when the train approached, She did not move. When the carriage passed, she was gone. Cameras recorded nothing, no figure, no shadow, only static from the moving train. Reports multiplied over the following months, each eerily similar. Witnesses consistently saw a figure in black, standing motionless, sometimes tilting her head, as if acknowledging them. She never interacted directly, yet her presence was overwhelming, chilling, and sorrowful. Commuters spoke of an oppressive feeling pressing on the chest, as if her grief had physical weight. The descriptions were consistent: long dark hair, pale skin, and a presence that felt simultaneously fragile and heavy with despair. One early witness, Clara, a high school student, described seeing the woman in Victorian morning attire, standing at the far end of the platform. The figure seemed to watch the tracks intently. When the train arrived, Clara said she saw the woman collapse onto the rails, then vanish. She recalled a faint sigh carried on the night fog. Her account matched historical reports, including a 1923 death of a young woman in mourning clothes. Struck by a train while traveling to meet her fiancé, staff tried to explain the sightings rationally. Pranksters, hallucinations, and stress were considered, yet independent witnesses consistently gave matching details. CCTV footage revealed nothing unusual. Motion sensors, infrared cameras, and night vision recorded no anomaly. The absence of evidence made the experiences more unsettling rather than less. The woman seemed to exist in a layer of reality, imperceptible to conventional means. One of the most compelling accounts came from Mr. Hargreaves, a clerk who had worked at the station for decades. He said the woman appeared only under certain conditions: fog, emptiness, and late hours. She would move along the tracks with deliberate precision, stopping at specific points. Attempts to approach her failed. She vanished before he could reach her. He felt not fear, but inevitability, as though she belonged to the tracks and he was merely a witness to her existence. Local historians connected the sightings to Margaret Elwood, a young woman killed in 1923. Her description, black attire, pale complexion, sorrowful demeanor, closely matched modern reports. Further archival research revealed multiple accidents involving women over decades, often under tragic circumstances. The woman on the tracks, it seemed, had become a spectral emblem of recurring grief tied to the station. Forensic attempts to gather evidence produced nothing. Dust swabs, residue samples, and tracks yielded no human DNA, fibers, or disturbance. Witnesses reported her presence, yet physical proof remained absent. The phenomenon defied conventional measurement. The woman existed fleetingly, interacting with perception rather than matter. Sightings followed a pattern, between 11:30 p.m. and 12:15 a.m. Foggy nights, and specific positions near the far end of the platform. She rarely moved quickly, but subtle gestures, tilting her head, shifting her gaze, gave the impression of awareness and intelligence. The phenomenon could not be dismissed as an optical illusion or coincidence. Independent witnesses, unaware of the legend, described identical features. Some claimed direct interactions. Jonathan, a commuter, called out to her once. She turned, and he felt a wave of grief so intense he stumbled. When he looked again, she was gone. Clara, the student, dreamt of her for weeks after her encounter. Seeing the woman silently stepping onto the tracks, waiting, sorrowful, the experience left an emotional imprint that lingered long after leaving the station. Investigators documented every sighting meticulously. Patterns emerged in behavior, appearance, and timing, suggesting intelligence or ritual rather than random. Haunting, fog, late night hours, and solitude were key factors. Some theorized she was a residual haunting, a replay of trauma embedded in the station's memory. Others considered her sentient, feeding on attention, grief, and fear. The station's reputation affected behavior. Commuters avoided late hours. Night staff adhered to strict protocols. Maintenance crews requested day shifts. Yet the sightings persisted, unchanged, impervious to modern lighting, surveillance, or security measures. She remained constant, a ghostly fixture of the station's identity. Psychologists suggested hallucinations, fatigue, and mass suggestion. These explanations failed to account for simultaneous, independent sightings with consistent details. Witnesses reported identical descriptions of dress, posture, and expression. The woman existed beyond ordinary perception, observable to some, but invisible to others, yet leaving a lasting psychological impact on all who saw her. Historical records reinforced the theory of tragedy-bound persistence. Fatalities at the station, involving women in black attire, spanned decades. Each accident aligned with subsequent reports of sightings. The station, it seemed, was a focal point for grief, a place where human tragedy imprinted itself on reality, giving rise to a presence that transcended time. The emotional impact was profound. Witnesses described sadness, dread, and helplessness, lingering long after encounters. Some had recurring dreams, seeing the woman step onto the tracks, silently watching trains pass, sorrowful yet unthreatening. Her presence was oppressive, subtle, and unforgettable. Journalists covering the phenomenon reported palpable unease during late-night investigations. Even skeptics felt a weight in the air, an inexplicable tension. National attention cemented the legend, yet no evidence could explain it. She persisted as a spectral enigma, tethered to history, memory, and grief. Despite decades of surveillance and investigation, the woman endures. Her appearance is timeless, unaffected by technology or rational scrutiny. She manifests consistently, a haunting reminder of the station's tragic past. Commuters and staff instinctively glance toward the far end of the platform at night, half expecting her to appear. Her presence is a lingering sorrow, waiting silently on the tracks for a train that may never arrive. Some conclude she is a residual imprint of tragedy. Others believe she is a conscious entity bound to the station. Regardless, she is undeniably real to those who see her. Time, technology, and skepticism have failed to diminish her presence. The woman on the tracks is a ghostly reminder of grief's persistence and the station's unresolved past. A figure that will continue to appear as long as the tracks remain. Even now, on quiet nights, when the fog rolls in and the last train approaches, the platform seems heavier, as if holding its breath. Witnesses swear they feel her gaze, a sorrowful weight pressing on anyone present. She waits silently, unwavering, a tragic presence bound forever to the rails, and those who encounter her cannot help but feel the depth of her grief. Let's move to our fourth story. The first time I heard the last train whistle, I didn't know it was a warning. I was 22, working as a night security guard at Eastgate Railway Station. By midnight, the station was silent, save for distant wind through the tunnels. My duty was simple: patrol the empty platforms, check carriages, ensure no trespassers. I had no idea the station would become a place of terror, or that the whistle would mark the beginning of something I couldn't escape. It began subtly. Footsteps echoed in empty corridors, lights flickered, and sometimes there was a faint smell of smoke where none should be. At first, I blamed exhaustion, late nights, and too much caffeine. Then came the whistle, not the ordinary train whistle, but something drawn out and mournful, vibrating through the platform and the tunnels. I froze, certain it was impossible, yet it persisted, calling me toward the tracks. The first time I saw her, she stood at the far end of the platform, pale and expressionless, dressed in an old-fashioned conductor's uniform. Her eyes were hollow, reflecting the dim lights. The whistle sounded again, sharp and insistent, and she turned slowly toward me. Panic rose, though rationally I knew she couldn't be real. There were no employees at this hour, no trains running. And yet, she existed, undeniable. In the nights that followed, the whistle continued. Sometimes it came as I patrolled, sometimes in the office reviewing footage. I noticed patterns. The whistle sounded 1 hour before any scheduled train, even if the train was cancelled. Always, the woman appeared first distant, then gradually closer. Her movements were subtle, but deliberate, and her presence carried a weight I could feel pressing on my chest. I began documenting everything. My notebook filled with descriptions of shadows, fleeting movements, and the ever-present dread that she was waiting. The shadow she cast often preceded her, stretching unnaturally across the tiles, though no light should have allowed it. I became obsessed, unable to leave the station, compelled to record her every appearance. Other staff noticed changes in me. They warned me to stay away from the far platform, claiming it was cursed. Commuters occasionally saw me staring into the fog, muttering to myself, frantically scribbling notes. They couldn't hear the whistle, couldn't see her. The station had become a private nightmare, my perception alone tethered to her presence. The whistle grew louder, transforming from a signal to a voice. I heard faint whispers within it, sometimes laughter, sometimes cries of despair. Sleep became impossible. The sound invaded dreams, making the night unbearable. The woman would appear in my dreams too, standing silently on the platform, tilting her head, watching. The station consumed my mind. I tried to confront her. Approaching her on the platform, I felt the floor stretch beneath my feet, the station warping unnaturally. Each step toward her grew heavier, slower, until I reached the spot where she had been, and found nothing. Only the fog remained, thick and cold, curling like fingers along the rails. Over time, I began to hear phantom trains, wheels clanging, doors slamming, though no trains ran at that hour. The whistle became musical, a haunting melody resonating in my chest. Occasionally, I swore it formed words I could not understand. Each sound heralded her movement, each note a reminder that she was closer than ever. The psychological strain was immense. Friends noticed my obsession, my inability to sleep, my trembling hands. Rationality no longer helped. Nights were spent patrolling, recording, and observing her ghostly form. Each encounter left me more unnerved. I began doubting my own senses, but I knew deep down she was real. The station had become her domain, and I was trapped within it. Months passed. My notes became frantic, detailing subtle changes in shadows, fleeting glimpses, and the whistle's increasing intensity. I realized I could not leave. Attempts to resign or avoid the station failed. The whistle would follow me, echoing in my mind, pulling me back. She existed in a layer of reality, inaccessible to others, manipulating perception, and bending the station to her will. The climax came one night, when the whistle sounded louder than ever. I froze at the edge of the platform. She appeared directly in front of me, closer than I had ever seen. The tracks stretched impossibly into darkness, the station warped around her presence. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. Then, unmistakably, I heard a word: stay. My body refused to move. It was then I understood. I was tethered, bound by some unseen force, a part of the station now, and there was no escape. Years have passed. I remain at Eastgate, haunted by the whistle, compelled to patrol, to record, to witness. She continues to appear sometimes at the far end of the platform, sometimes barely perceptible in the fog. Sleep brings nightmares of endless tracks, the whistle calling, and her silent gaze. I know the station is hers, the whistle hers, and I am trapped within her rhythm. New staff occasionally hear the faint whistle, see a pale figure on the tracks. I warn them, though they rarely believe me. The station has become a place where reality bends, where perception dominates, where the last train whistle carries the weight of something unnatural. She waits silently, patient, a presence I cannot escape, and the station will never be mine again. Even today, in quiet moments, I can hear it faintly, that last train whistle, drawing me back, reminding me that the woman on the platform is not gone. She waits eternal, for a train that will never come, and I am bound to witness her forever. Let's move to our 5th story. The station had been closed for years, a relic of the past. But locals still whispered about it, the platform where no train ever stopped. Yet passengers sometimes claimed they could hear distant whistles and see lights flickering in the fog. It was called West Hollow Station, and I never believed in ghosts until the night I was assigned to investigate it as part of an urban exploration group. I arrived alone, carrying only a flashlight and a notebook. The platform was overgrown, weeds curling through cracks in the concrete, rusted rails stretching into darkness. The air smelled of damp metal and decayed wood, and a silence so deep it felt physical pressed down on me. As I stepped onto the platform, the beam of my flashlight caught a faint outline of a figure at the far end. A man, or something resembling one, standing perfectly still, staring at the tracks. I called out, my voice echoing hollowly, but there was no response. The figure didn't move. My heart pounded, and a cold shiver ran down my spine. Then came the sound, soft at first, like the rustle of shoes on metal, growing into the unmistakable rhythm of approaching footsteps along the platform. I turned, expecting no one, but the platform remained empty behind me. As I continued walking, I noticed old posters peeling from the walls, advertisements for trains that hadn't run in decades. Yet somehow, the flickering of the fluorescent lights suggested recent activity. A train whistle echoed faintly, distant, and yet the sound seemed to come from within the station itself. My flashlight flickered, and I felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. The figure at the end of the platform moved slightly, though its movement was unnervingly slow, almost inhuman. Its shadow stretched unnaturally across the cracked tiles, bending around obstacles as though ignoring the rules of light. I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps a reflection, perhaps a trick of the fog, but the figure's presence was undeniable. My notebook, resting in my hands, felt heavier, as though weighed down by anticipation or fear. Then I saw the train, or what appeared to be one. Out of the darkness, a set of headlights emerged, but the rails ahead were empty, twisted and overgrown. The sound of metal on metal resonated through the station, a grinding, mournful squeal, yet the train never arrived. And still, the figure remained, staring, unmoving, as if it had been waiting for the train, or for me. For decades I moved closer, my flashlight beam trembling. The figure's features became clearer. A man in a uniform that looked decades old, eyes hollow, expressionless, pale as ash. He raised a hand slowly, deliberately, and my stomach turned cold. I wanted to run, to escape the oppressive air, but my legs refused to obey. It was as if the platform itself had claimed me, rooted me to the spot. The distant whistle came again, louder, more insistent, vibrating through my chest. The figure stepped forward, yet the sound of its movement produced no noise. Each step was silent, deliberate. My rational mind screamed that this was impossible, that I was hallucinating, exhausted by fear and night air. But every instinct, every sense, confirmed that the figure was real, that it existed in the space around me, bending perception, manipulating reality itself. Time began to lose meaning. Seconds stretched into minutes, and minutes into hours. The platform seemed to lengthen, curving into darkness, where there should have been walls. I felt watched from every angle, and the air grew heavier. Charged with a presence I could not see, but could sense a pressure, a subtle vibration beneath my feet. The figure's gaze never wavered. Its eyes seemed to follow me, even as I looked away. I tried to speak, to ask questions, but my voice caught in my throat. Then, faintly, a whisper reached me, carried on the echoing wind of the abandoned station. "Do not leave." The words were barely audible, yet unmistakable. My pulse raced, fear anchoring me to the spot. The figure took another step, and the shadows around it deepened unnaturally, stretching further than light should allow. I stumbled back, tripping over cracked concrete, and the flashlight rolled from my hand. Darkness enveloped me, but the figure remained visible, impossibly clear, despite the absence of light. The platform seemed to hum, a low, resonant sound, like metal vibrating with unseen energy. I realized the station itself was alive, a conduit for the figure's presence, a space that no longer obeyed the laws of physics. My mind reeled. I thought of turning to run, to escape into the forests surrounding the station, but a sense of inevitability gripped me. The figure raised both hands now, slowly, as though conducting an unseen orchestra of shadows and sound. The whistle echoed. Again, this time inside my skull, vibrating in tune with the unnatural resonance of the platform. Panic surged, but my body refused to move. And then I understood. This place was not abandoned. It had been waiting. The figure, the whistle, the shadows, all part of a ritual, older than memory. I was an intruder, and the station was correcting the imbalance caused by my presence. My thoughts raced as the oppressive energy thickened, pressing against my chest, filling my lungs with icy dread. I wanted to scream, to flee, but the air itself seemed to constrict around me, binding me to the platform. Hours may have passed, or minutes. Time was meaningless. The figure stepped closer, impossibly silent, and the platform continued to stretch beyond comprehension. I felt my consciousness tethered to the space, every nerve screaming that escape was futile. Then the figure spoke, its voice a low, hollow resonance. "You should not have come." The sound reverberated through my chest, shaking my bones. I realized the voice was not just auditory. It was physical, altering the very molecules around me, bending reality. I closed my eyes, hoping it was a nightmare, but the pressure persisted. The whistle sounded again, louder, harmonizing with the low hum of the platform. Shadows coiled and twisted, forming shapes that defied logic, faces, hands, eyes, reaching toward me from the darkness. I understood then that the station consumed intruders, folding them into its dimension of shadows, leaving no trace behind. I tried to run. My legs moved, but the space stretched endlessly. Every step forward brought no progress. The figure remained ahead, motionless, patient, inevitable. I screamed into the void, but no sound returned, only the unrelenting whistle and the weight of unseen hands pressing in from all directions. Fear became a physical entity, a living thing pressing against my chest, my skull, my very soul. At some point, I collapsed onto the platform. Darkness engulfed me, yet I remained aware, conscious of the figure standing above me. I could feel its gaze penetrating every part of me, analyzing, assessing, claiming. And then the whispers began again, voices of previous victims, or echoes of the station itself, murmuring in unison. "Do not leave, I am still there. I write this now in a notebook I keep hidden, documenting the experience for anyone who might come searching, though I know none will." The figure appears every time I look up, always in the same place, watching. The station has claimed me, tethered me to its existence, and the whistle will continue to call. Anyone who ventures here alone at night risks the same fate. The forest surrounding the station is silent, but the platform hums with an energy I cannot describe. The whistle echoes endlessly, sometimes faint, sometimes deafening, guiding the figure, orchestrating the shadows. Binding the station's domain, I have tried to leave, but the platform stretches infinitely now. Any attempt at escape ends in loops, returning me to the same spot, facing the same figure. I have learned to coexist with it, recording every movement, every sound, noting the patterns in the shadows. The figure never moves too quickly. Its presence is methodical, precise, deliberate. The whistle signals changes, subtle shifts in energy that I have come to recognize. My life now revolves around observation, documentation, and survival within the station's parameters. I write this as a warning. West Hollow Station is not abandoned. The rails, the fog, the shadows, the whistle. They are alive, and they feed on intruders. The figure at the far end is patient, eternal, and will never leave. Time and space have no meaning here. The station stretches beyond comprehension, a liminal space between reality and nightmare. I hear the whistle now, as I write, faint, but unmistakable. And I know that she, or it, or whatever the presence is, waits for the next unsuspecting soul. I can only hope someone reads this before it is too late, before they too become part of the shadows, tethered forever to the platform, the rails. The endless echoing whistle that calls across time and space. I remain here, documenting, observing, tethered to the platform, to the figure, to the station. The shadows twist, the whistle blows, and I know I will never leave. The station is patient, the figure is eternal, and the night never ends at West Hollow. Let's move to our sixth story. It was a humid summer night when I first realized there was something terribly wrong with Belcross Station. The station had always been quiet after midnight, but that night, as I walked along the deserted platform, I felt a weight in the air, heavy and suffocating, as though the fog itself had substance. The usual distant hum of the trains had been replaced by a deep, resonant silence, punctuated only by the occasional creak of metal under unseen weight. I had volunteered for the late-night maintenance shift, thinking it would be a routine job, a quiet, simple way to earn extra money. I could not have been more wrong. The first sign that something was off came when I reached the old signal box. I had never been inside it before. Its windows were grimy, coated with years of dust and neglect. As I opened the door, A sudden gust of icy wind slammed it shut behind me, leaving me in semi-darkness. The flashlight in my hand illuminated nothing unusual at first, just the worn control panels and frayed wires dangling from the ceiling. Then I saw faint scratches on the wooden floor, almost like claw marks, stretching across the room toward me. My first thought was rodents, but the scratches were too deliberate, too deep, too long. They ended at the base of the control panel, as though something had pressed against it. I shook off the unease, blaming fatigue and imagination. The station had a history of unexplained incidents. Stories told by older staff about shadows that moved in empty corridors or whispers in the fog. I had never taken them seriously, but tonight, the tales seemed to follow me like a shadow. As I returned to the platform to inspect the tracks, I noticed something I couldn't explain. Faint footprints in the dust. Perfectly human but impossibly large, leading straight down the middle of the rails. They disappeared abruptly, as if the person had simply vanished into thin air by midnight. The fog had thickened, curling around the platform like living fingers. My flashlight flickered, throwing distorted shadows across the concrete. Then I heard it, a faint tapping, rhythmic and deliberate, echoing from the end of the platform. I froze, my blood running cold. The sound did not match anything mechanical. It was deliberate, precise, a series of sharp knocks that seemed to count, though in no recognizable pattern. I called out, my voice trembling, but no answer came. The tapping continued, growing louder, as though whatever was making it was aware of my presence, measuring me, taunting me. I moved cautiously toward the end of the platform, heart hammering in my chest. The fog swirled unnaturally, thickening in areas where the beam of my flashlight should have illuminated. My instincts screamed to turn back, to leave, but my curiosity, and some part of my pride, kept me moving forward. That's when I saw her, a woman standing on the tracks, perfectly still, staring directly at me. Her dress was tattered and dark, clinging to her as though wet. Her hair hung in long black strands that obscured her face, but I could feel her eyes hollow and unblinking, fixed on me with an intensity that pierced the fog. I called out to her, my voice shaky, but she didn't respond. She didn't move. Then, impossibly, she began to step forward, slowly, deliberately, but no sound accompanied her movements. My rational mind refused to accept what I was seeing. I expected her feet to make contact with the rails, with the gravel, with the platform, but they made no noise. Each step seemed to pull the fog along with her, curling around her legs and rising like smoke. My stomach churned with dread, and I stumbled backward, almost dropping my flashlight, which flickered violently as though reacting to her presence. The tapping sound resumed, now faster, more insistent, echoing off the platform walls. I turned to look down the platform and saw multiple figures emerging from the fog. They were like her, pale, silent, featureless in the dim light, moving with impossible grace. I counted at least 5 before my mind refused to continue, the numbers meaningless in the face of something so unreal. Panic overtook me. I ran, my feet pounding against the concrete, but the fog seemed to stretch endlessly ahead, every step. Forward a struggle. I could hear whispers now, soft, incoherent, like hundreds of voices murmuring in unison. Echoing inside my skull, I reached the maintenance office, slamming the door behind me. I collapsed against the wall, gasping for breath. The tapping continued outside, accompanied by the low, mournful wail of the wind, or perhaps it wasn't the wind. I peered through the grimy windows and saw shadows moving along the tracks, figures stepping in sync with the rhythmic knocks. I tried to convince myself it was an elaborate prank. Maybe urban explorers or locals playing tricks, but the figures moved in ways no human could, their forms bending and stretching unnaturally through the fog. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. I could not tell. Time became meaningless in the oppressive, otherworldly atmosphere of Belcross Station. The fog seemed alive, pulsating with energy, wrapping around every structure, invading the office. I could feel it pressing against my skin, entering my lungs, weighing down my chest. Every instinct screamed to leave, yet I felt rooted to the spot. Trapped by some invisible force, then came the sound of a train. I froze, heart in my throat. But no train arrived. Instead, the rails vibrated, as though something massive was approaching. Though the fog obscured all visibility, the whispers intensified, merging into a single, guttural chant, repeating over and over. I realized then that the station itself was sentient in some way, feeding off fear, manipulating perception. Every light flicker, every shadow, every sound, was a signal, a lure, designed to draw intruders into its web. I gathered what courage I had left and attempted to escape through the side exit. As I ran, the figures advanced, gliding silently across the platform, converging in my path. Their presence was oppressive, suffocating, and I could feel their cold awareness pressing into my mind. My legs burned, my lungs ached, but every path I tried led me back to the platform, as if the station refused to let me leave. I was caught in a loop, a spatial distortion I could not comprehend, and the tapping and whispering followed me relentlessly. Eventually, I stumbled into a disused waiting room, doors slamming shut behind me. I pressed my back against the wall, trying to slow my breathing. The fog seeped in through the cracks, curling along the floor, thickening the air with its unnatural weight. I could hear the figures moving outside, their soft, synchronized steps, the echo of the taps, the low chant. It was all-consuming, impossible to ignore. I understood then that these were not ghosts in the traditional sense. They were extensions of the station itself, manifestations of its power and hunger, in desperation. I grabbed a fire extinguisher and smashed the windows, hoping to create an escape. The glass shattered, but the fog swirled in through the opening, rushing toward me with unnatural speed. One of the figures appeared at the broken window, featureless yet horrifyingly human, its gaze locked on mine. I swung the extinguisher at it, and it passed through the form like smoke, leaving a cold chill. In my hands, I realized that any physical attempt to confront the presence was futile. The station was reality itself here, and I was powerless by morning. The fog began to lift, revealing an empty platform. I stumbled outside, disoriented and trembling. My coworkers found me hours later, muttering incoherently, unable to explain the scratches on my arms or the dirt and debris on my uniform. I tried to report what happened, but my account sounded insane. The station appeared normal, empty, lifeless. Yet I knew the truth. Belcross Station was alive, patient, and eternal, waiting silently for the next soul, foolish enough to enter. At night, since that night, I have avoided Belcross entirely, but I still hear reports, urban explorers, late-night commuters, security staff of strange occurrences, figures glimpsed in fog, soft tapping along rails, inexplicable whispers. Every report matches what I experienced. The station remains a place of fear, its presence extending beyond the limits of physical reality. Anyone who ventures there at night risks being caught, trapped, and consumed by the station's sentience. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can hear the tapping, the whispers, the mournful vibration of the rails, and I know that the figures are still there. Belcross is patient, it waits. And I can never forget the oppressive, conscious weight of that night, the suffocating fog, the inescapable, silent figures, and the terrifying understanding that the station itself is alive, watching, and hungry. Let's move to our 7th story. I had been warned about Grayfield Station, though at the time I didn't know to take the warnings seriously. Old-timers in the nearby town muttered of disappearances, strange lights, and whispers that drifted from the tracks late at night. Most of the tales were dismissed as folklore, the kind of stories passed down to scare curious children. But curiosity has a stubborn way of dragging people into trouble. And as a freelance photographer seeking unique locations, Grayfield seemed perfect. Abandoned for decades, isolated, and said to be haunted. I thought I was prepared for darkness, for silence, for empty platforms. I wasn't prepared for what waited for me. I arrived just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the station in bruised purples and muted oranges. The station building leaned slightly to one side, roof tiles missing, windows cracked and dust-laden. Rusted signage, read Grayfield, barely legible through grime. I stepped onto the platform, my camera bag heavy on my shoulder, and the air hit me immediately, damp, cold, and unnervingly still. Not a sound except the occasional rattle of a loose shutter, or the distant crowing of crows returning to their nests. And then I heard it, the faintest whisper, carried on the wind. I paused, ears straining. It was human, almost a sigh though. I couldn't tell from where it came. Shaking off the chill creeping up my spine, I set up my camera and began taking photos, moving along the platform carefully. The wooden planks groaned beneath my weight, and shadows stretched unnaturally in the fading light. Something about the station felt alive, though I could not explain why. A sense of being watched began to build, a prickling at the back of my neck. I told myself it was nerves, the effect of isolation. Yet the whispers persisted, indistinct but persistent, as twilight gave way to darkness. I noticed movements in the corners of my vision. At first I assumed they were animals, rats, or perhaps stray cats, but these shapes were too upright, too deliberate. Shadows shifted unnaturally, sometimes matching no logical source of light. I tried to photograph them, snapping frame after frame, but the images came out empty, save for the occasional distortion, a blur, a smear. Something out of place, yet vaguely humanoid. My unease grew, but I pressed on, driven by a mix of professional ambition and the irrational hope that these were mere tricks of my eyes. Then I saw the figure. At the far end of the platform, partially obscured by fog rolling in from the nearby woods, a woman stood, perfectly still. Her clothing seemed old-fashioned, an era before my time. Long dark hair fell across her face, hiding features I could not discern. My instincts screamed to leave, yet my feet moved forward, camera raised. The fog seemed to part around her slightly, curling unnaturally at her feet, and a cold wind brushed past me. There was something undeniably wrong about her, something that made the air itself seem heavier. I called out, my voice echoing across the empty platform. No response. She remained motionless. Then, impossibly, she began to move toward me, not at a normal pace. Her steps were measured, gliding, silent, and yet purposeful. Each step made the fog swirl in unnatural patterns, as if the air itself obeyed her. I froze, unable to tear my eyes away. My camera shook in my hands, the beam of my flashlight slicing through the fog, revealing more than I wished to see. Figures emerging from the mist behind her, pale and featureless, all gliding toward me with identical, inexorable motion. Panic surged through me. I turned to flee, but the platform seemed to stretch and distort. Where I expected to see the station entrance, there was only endless planks, rail tracks disappearing into thick, rolling fog. Every direction I tried led me back to the same spot, facing her and the other figures. My heart pounded in my chest, my lungs burned. The whispers rose, coalescing into something almost intelligible. A chant, a low hum, a call. I couldn't understand the words, but they carried intent, awareness, and menace. I stumbled backward and fell, scraping my hands and knees against the rough planks. The figures stopped for a moment, as though observing me, and then continued, gliding, imperceptibly closer. The woman's head lifted slightly, and I thought I saw her lips move. I strained to hear, but the fog swallowed sound, leaving only the oppressive silence punctuated by the faint, low chant. The air vibrated subtly, and my vision blurred. I realized then that this station was not merely haunted, it was sentient, aware, and it was testing me. Hours seemed to pass. I lost track of time completely, trapped in this loop of fear and confusion. Shadows deepened unnaturally, figures flickered in and out of visibility, and the fog thickened, curling along the tracks like serpents. My camera revealed nothing in real time, but when I glanced at the display, the images were horrifying. Dozens of pale faces, distorted and twisted, staring directly at the lens, eyes hollow and endless. Some images seemed impossible, as though layers of reality had been peeled back. I tried calling for help on my phone. No signal, not even a flicker. The station had consumed all traces of normality, creating an isolated pocket in which only the figures and I existed. Hunger and fatigue began to gnaw at me, but I dared not leave the platform. Every step I attempted led me back to the same place. My rational mind refused to accept this, but my body and senses confirmed the truth. Greyfield was alive, and I was its prey. I remember crawling toward the station building at one point, desperate for any semblance of shelter. The door creaked open, revealing the interior frozen in a strange stasis. Dust motes, suspended unnaturally. Shadows stretched impossibly long. The figures glided through the fog outside, their silent observation unrelenting. I tried to block the door, barricade myself, but the air inside seemed to bend, carrying the whispers and cold directly to me. Panic overtook reason, and I realized that confinement was no protection here. By what I assume was midnight. Though time had no meaning, I saw movement along the tracks again. Headlights appeared far in the distance, but the train never arrived. The sound of grinding metal echoed, growing louder, but the rails remained empty. The figures moved with the rhythm of the phantom train, their gliding steps matching the imaginary wheels, and the fog pulsated with their motion. I realized that the station was attempting to draw me into something beyond comprehension, something that existed between reality and nightmare. Desperation forced me to act. I bolted from the building, racing along the platform, intent on reaching the forest beyond. But the fog seemed alive, thickening ahead of me, curling around my legs, slowing my progress. The woman at the end of the platform raised her arm, and the whispers became audible in my head. Each word was like a physical blow, pressing into my skull, bending my perception. I stumbled, fell, and when I looked up, the platform had lengthened impossibly. The figures closer, their faces clearer, their hollow eyes unblinking. I screamed, a raw, animal sound that echoed through the fog, and the figures froze momentarily, tilting their heads. Then, the chant resumed, rising in intensity, as if the station itself were responding to my defiance. I tried to cover my ears, but the sound was inside me now, vibrating through my bones, invading every corner of my awareness. My vision blurred, darkness creeping into the edges of perception. I felt myself slipping, the world bending, my consciousness tethered to the platform as if I were being rewritten into the station itself. I cannot describe exactly how long I was trapped in that state. Minutes, hours, days. Time became meaningless, reduced to cycles of fear, flight, and observation. I noted every pattern, every movement, every whisper. The figures never left, always present, gliding silently, testing me, stretching the boundaries of my sanity. I began to speak to them, even though I knew no one would answer, and sometimes I swore the fog shifted in response, moving with intention. Finally, at what I assume was dawn, though the light was filtered through unnatural fog, I found myself on the platform alone. The figures had vanished. The woman, the whispering, the sense of being watched, all dissipated. I collapsed to the planks, exhausted and trembling. But the station had left its mark. My mind could no longer dismiss the impossibilities I had witnessed. My camera contained hundreds of images, but every one was distorted, blurred, revealing glimpses of the figures, the impossible lengthening of the platform, and the unrelenting fog. I returned home, but sleep did not come easily. In my dreams, I was back at Greyfield, the platform stretching endlessly, figures gliding silently, whispers echoing in the fog. Sometimes, I wake in the middle of the night, hearing the faintest tapping along my bedroom floor, or a whisper that sounds eerily like the station calling my name. I know now that Greyfield Station is not merely abandoned. It is alive, patient, and aware. It exists somewhere outside normal perception, and it hungers for attention, for witnesses, for souls to tether to its eternal fog-filled platform. Even today, I cannot bring myself to return to the station, but I follow reports, photographs, news stories, urban exploration posts, and I see the pattern continue. Every person who ventures alone at night describes the same impossible fog, the same silent gliding figures, the same sense of being trapped. Greyfield waits for the next soul, and I know that sooner or later, it will come for me again. Let's move to our 8th story. I had always been drawn to abandoned places, the kind of locations that carried echoes of the past, whispers of forgotten lives. When I heard of Iron Hollow Station, I thought it would be the perfect setting for a photography series. Located miles from the nearest town, its rusted rails and crumbling platforms had long been deserted. Yet there were stories, warnings from locals about travelers vanishing, lights flickering at impossible hours, and faint cries drifting through the fog. I dismissed these tales as exaggeration, folklore meant to scare children and thrill seekers. But that night, I learned just how wrong I had been. The approach to the station was unsettling. Fog clung to the ground in thick, rolling blankets, curling around telephone poles and broken fencing. The air smelled of damp iron and mildew. As I stepped onto the platform, the familiar sounds of wildlife and distant traffic seemed to vanish, replaced by a profound, unnatural silence. My flashlight beam swept across the rusted rails and wooden planks, illuminating nothing but decay, or so I thought. At the far end of the platform, there was movement, subtle and slow. I squinted, convinced it was my imagination. A shadow detached itself from the fog, humanoid, but impossibly tall, with limbs that bent slightly too long and angles that seemed wrong. I raised my camera, the shutter clicking softly in the eerie stillness. The figure didn't retreat or respond. It merely observed, a presence that seemed to bend the air around it. A shiver ran down my spine, and I realized that the air itself felt heavier here, almost tangible. The fog wasn't natural either. It moved against the wind, curling toward the figure, surrounding it like a living cloak. I wanted to back away, but my curiosity routed me to the platform. Minutes, or perhaps hours, passed. The platform seemed to stretch impossibly longer than it should have been. The shadow shifted ever so slightly, gliding forward without making a sound. I tried to focus on details. Tattered clothing, the hollow sockets where eyes might have been, the elongated fingers that seemed to scrape the air. My rational mind scrambled for explanations, wind optical illusions, exhaustion, but none fit the impossible reality in front of me. Then I heard it, a low, resonant hum, vibrating through the platform and my chest simultaneously. I turned, slowly scanning the rails, but no train, no machinery, nothing that could create the sound. The figure took another step forward, and the fog responded, swirling and thickening, moving like smoke around invisible obstacles. I felt a creeping sense of awareness, as if the station itself was observing me, measuring my reactions, testing my fear. My heartbeat accelerated, my palms grew clammy, yet I could not tear my eyes away. The next moment, multiple figures appeared, not all humanoid. Some shapes were twisted, grotesque, blending the outlines of human forms with the abstract shadows that flickered between solid and insubstantial. They advanced slowly, deliberately, following a rhythm that matched the low hum. Panic surged through me. I turned to retreat, but the platform had changed, where I expected the station building to stand. There was nothing but endless fog. Every path led me back to the same spot. Facing the advancing figures, I tried calling out, screaming, anything to break the spell, but my voice seemed swallowed by the fog. It returned only as a faint echo, warped and distorted, almost like the station itself was mocking me. The figures moved closer, gliding, yet never touching the ground in the way that gravity should allow. My camera shook in my hands. I snapped photo after photo, but each frame was worse than the last. Faces contorted into impossible shapes, shadows stretching into infinity, fog forming indistinct figures that weren't present when I looked directly at them. The oppressive atmosphere continued to build. The hum deepened, merging with whispers that were impossible to locate. Sometimes they sounded like cries for help, other times like chanting in a language I could not understand. I realized then that the station wasn't just haunted, it was alive in a way that transcended reality. It was aware of me, aware of every move, every thought, every flicker of fear. My rational mind wavered, struggling to hold on to what I knew to be real. I stumbled toward the station office, hoping for some refuge, some sense of reality. The building was in ruins, doors barely hanging on hinges, windows cracked and frosted, over with decades of dust. As I entered, the temperature dropped sharply, and I could see my breath misting in the dim light. Something in the shadows shifted. I froze, flashlight trembling in my grip. A figure emerged, tall, featureless, and impossibly black, absorbing the light rather than reflecting it. It tilted its head as if observing, considering me, and the low hum intensified, vibrating directly in my skull. I backed away slowly, stumbling over broken floorboards. My flashlight flickered, and in the brief darkness, the shadows multiplied, figures emerging from corners where none could exist. I realized with terror that the station itself was folding space around me. Corridors lengthened impossibly, platforms stretched beyond logic, and fog filled every open area like living smoke. Each time I tried to flee, I ended up in the same position, facing the figures, facing the station's awareness. Hours, or what I perceived as hours, passed in this loop of terror. I collapsed on the floor at one point, exhausted, trembling. The figures continued their silent approach, moving with an inhuman grace. Their presence was overwhelming, pressing into my senses, bending perception. I could hear my own heartbeat, but it sounded wrong, echoing in impossible rhythms, blending with the station's low hum. I understood then that escape was futile. The station had claimed me, tethered my consciousness to its existence. Then came movement along the rails. A train appeared, yet impossible. It hovered slightly above the tracks, its headlights casting light that seemed to bend rather than illuminate. The figures glided along the platform in sync with it, a horrifying ritual of motion and awareness. I watched, paralyzed with terror, as the train passed, or seemed to pass without sound, without weight, without leaving tracks. The figures followed, moving in tandem, guided by the impossible rhythm. Desperation overtook me. I ran blindly, seeking any exit, but the fog swallowed all familiar points of reference. Every step forward returned me to the same position, trapped in the station's looping geometry. My mind began to fracture under the strain. Whispers filled my head, indistinct but insistent, and shadows pressed against the edges of my vision. I realized that Grey Hollow, no Iron Hollow, was more than a station. It was a liminal space, a trap, a sentient entity feeding on fear and observation. I found a small alcove and tried to barricade myself, covering my ears to block the whispers. The figures paused outside, silent, tilting their heads, observing. One leaned forward, its form stretching impossibly, and I felt a psychic weight, a pulling sensation, as if my consciousness itself was being evaluated. I realized that the station wasn't merely present. It was testing me, understanding me, waiting for me to break completely. Eventually, exhaustion forced me into a semblance of sleep. My dreams were filled with impossible spaces, platforms that looped into infinity, figures moving in perfect synchronicity, fog thick and alive. I awoke to the same low hum, the same faint whispering, but the light had changed. The station's manipulation of time was evident. Dawn seemed to arrive and recede in a cycle, independent of my perception. I understood with horror that I had been trapped longer than any normal human could endure. Yet still conscious, still aware, still terrified, when I finally staggered outside, blinking into pale light that filtered through the dense fog. The station appeared ordinary, rusted, overgrown, abandoned. But I knew better. I had seen the figures, felt the awareness, experienced the folding of reality itself. I had been tethered to a sentient presence, an ancient and patient intelligence that thrived on fear, observation, and the twisting of space. I left the site, but the experience remained. Even now, the memory haunts me. I hear the low hum at night, sometimes the whispers, sometimes the faintest echo of footsteps across impossible distances. I follow news reports, urban exploration accounts, and sometimes see photos that mirror my own experiences. Figures in the fog, shadows in impossible positions, glimpses of trains that defy physics. I know Iron Hollow Station is still waiting, patiently, silently, for the next intruder, the next observer, the next soul willing to step into its domain. I do not know if I will ever return. Part of me fears that I cannot, that the station maintains a tether on my consciousness that I have yet to fully sever. The photographs I took that night remain distorted, full of impossibilities. Faces in the fog, elongated shadows, rails that vanish into nothingness. And every time I see them, I hear the low hum again, and I am reminded that Iron Hollow Station is alive, aware, eternal, and hungry for the next observer to fall into its grasp. Again. Let's move to our 9th story. It was just past midnight when I arrived at Ashcroft Station, a place locals avoided after dark. The rumors were enough to keep most away, tales of ghostly figures on platforms, sudden inexplicable chills, and trains that appeared only to vanish. I had been sent to photograph the station for an urban exploration project, and I thought the stories were exaggeration. The moment I stepped onto the platform, though, I knew something was wrong. The air was heavy, damp, and cold, despite the summer night. A dense fog clung to the rails, moving as though alive, curling around the platform in subtle, deliberate patterns. The station was silent. Too silent. No distant city hum, no chirping insects, only the sound of my footsteps on the cracked concrete. I set up my camera, attempting to shake off the feeling of being watched. Then I noticed movement at the far end of the platform. A figure, tall and slender, standing perfectly still in the fog. I raised my flashlight, and the beam cut through the haze, revealing a face partially obscured by long, dark hair. I could not make out features, but the intensity of its gaze made my skin crawl. I felt an icy weight press against my chest, like the air itself was resisting my presence. I called out, trying to gauge if someone was playing a prank, but no response came. The figure didn't move, didn't blink. The fog around it thickened, curling upward as if drawn toward its form. Every instinct screamed to leave, but fascination rooted me to the platform. Slowly, the figure began to glide toward me, silent and deliberate. My heartbeat pounded, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as though every fiber of the station had become aware of my intrusion. I stumbled backward, tripping over a broken plank. My flashlight flickered, and in the brief darkness, the figure vanished. My rational mind tried to convince me it was a trick of the eyes, yet a faint whisper lingered, so soft I almost missed it. "Leave, leave." It seemed to murmur, though the words barely formed. The fog shifted again, and more figures emerged, pale, featureless, gliding silently along the platform, surrounding me without making a sound. Panic surged. I ran toward the exit, only to find that the platform stretched endlessly ahead. Every path I tried led me back to the same spot, facing the advancing figures. I screamed, but the sound returned, distorted, warped, as if the station itself mocked me. The air thickened, pressing against my lungs, each breath a struggle, I realized. Then that Ashcroft Station was not just haunted. It was alive, aware, and determined to trap anyone who dared enter after dark. Desperation drove me to hide inside the abandoned station office. Broken windows let in creeping fog that snaked across the floor, and shadows danced along the walls. The figures moved outside, gliding with impossible grace, tilting their heads in silent observation. I pressed my back against the wall, trembling, trying to convince myself that morning would bring escape. But the fog did not thin. It pressed closer, carrying whispers that seemed to seep directly into my mind. Time lost all meaning. Minutes, hours, perhaps days passed, though I could not tell. Every glance at my camera revealed distortions, elongated shadows, impossible angles, the faint glimmer of figures that disappeared when observed directly. I felt the station bending reality. Around me, warping perception and space. My body ached, but my consciousness remained tethered, fully aware of the unnatural presence surrounding me. I remember crawling toward a broken doorway, hoping to reach the tracks beyond. The fog reacted, swirling violently, forming shapes I could not comprehend, humanoid, yet twisted, their forms bending and stretching in impossible ways. The whispers grew louder, converging into a single chant that echoed inside my skull. I felt my own thoughts slipping, as if the station intended to absorb not just my body, but my mind. Exhaustion forced me to rest against a platform bench. The figures continued their silent advance, gliding closer, measuring, waiting. I understood then that Ashcroft Station thrived on fear, observation, and the slow erosion of rational thought. The fog itself was a predator, alive and sentient, moving with purpose to trap and consume intruders. At some point, I heard the faintest sound of a train, metallic grinding and low vibrations along the rails. My heart leaped with hope, but The sound was false. No train approached. The figures aligned along the platform, moving in sync with the imagined train, their ghostly forms bending the fog around them. I realized with horror that the station had created an entire illusion, a performance to disorient, terrify, and ensnare. I ran again, blindly, following instinct rather than sight. Every exit seemed blocked by fog, every path looping back to the same haunting figures. My flashlight flickered one last time, revealing the pallid, featureless faces of the figures inches from me. The whispers became a deafening roar inside my mind. I felt my consciousness strain against the weight of the station, struggling to maintain identity against the oppressive awareness pressing in from every side. Somehow, I found a broken stairway leading down to the tracks. I clung to the railing, sliding carefully, knowing that any misstep might be my end. The figures hovered at the edge of visibility, the fog thickening around them like living shadows. Every instinct screamed to flee, to escape into the surrounding woods, yet the station seemed to extend endlessly, folding space in ways my mind could not comprehend. By the faint light of early dawn, the fog finally began to thin. The figures retreated, vanishing into the dissipating mist. I stumbled onto the tracks, trembling, gasping for air, and ran toward the nearest road I could see. Only then did the weight lift, leaving me physically intact, but mentally scarred. Every detail remained in vivid memory. The endless fog, the gliding figures, the whispers, the oppressive awareness of a station alive in ways no human should encounter. Since that night, I have avoided Ashcroft Station entirely, but I follow reports from locals and urban explorers. The patterns are consistent. Sightings of pale, gliding figures, whispers carried by fog, trains that vanish without trace, explorers trapped in loops of perception. I know now that the station is more than abandoned. It is a sentient, patient entity, waiting for the next observer to become part of its eternal performance. Even now, I sometimes hear the whispers when I am alone. Faint and indistinct, but unmistakably there. Every time I see fog creeping along a platform in distant photographs or videos, I am reminded that Ashcroft Station is waiting, patient and eternal. And I know that if anyone enters after dark, the same fate I narrowly escaped will await them. Endless observation, the oppressive presence of something alive, and the unrelenting whispers that echo forever in the fog. Let's move to our 10 story. The moment I first heard of Blackthorn Station, I was drawn to it. A place long abandoned, shrouded in superstition, and whispered about in the surrounding villages. Most dismissed it as folklore, but the older residents warned against going there after nightfall. Tales of strange figures on the platforms, lights flickering at impossible angles, and travelers vanishing without a trace filled the air. I was a paranormal investigator at the time, and skepticism was my tool, yet curiosity and ambition often make one careless. The station's location, isolated deep in the forest, only added to its allure. I thought I was ready for the cold, the darkness, and the silence. I was wrong. I arrived just as twilight bled into night, the sky bruised with deep purples and grays. The forest surrounding Blackthorn Station seemed unnaturally silent, as if holding its breath. The approach was marked by cracked paths and rusted fences, with fog seeping from the tree line, like a living thing. The station itself leaned slightly, a skeletal shell of its former glory. Platform boards warped, paint peeling, and windows fractured. The air was thick with the scent of decay, wet wood, rust, and something metallic, tangy, almost like blood. I stepped onto the platform cautiously, feeling the first prickle of unease. There was no wind, yet the fog moved deliberately, curling around the platform and the tracks, as if guided by invisible hands. My flashlight beam swept across the station. The rails were rusted and broken in places, wooden sleepers partially swallowed by moss and weeds. I thought I saw movement at the far end of the platform. Squinting through the mist, I noticed a shadow, tall, gaunt, and unnervingly still. It did not seem human, yet its shape suggested a warped approximation of one. Long, dangling limbs bent at angles that were impossible. My heartbeat accelerated, and every instinct screamed at me to leave. I raised my camera and snapped a photograph, hoping for clarity. The figure remained. Not moving, not blinking, but somehow present in a way that warped the air around it. I called out tentatively, my voice trembling. There was no reply. The fog thickened, and the figure began to glide toward me, silent and deliberate. Panic surged, but curiosity anchored me. I wanted to understand, to document, to capture evidence of the impossible. My camera flashed again, and in that moment, the platform seemed to shift subtly. The distance to the figure compressed, then expanded, creating an impossible geometry that defied rational perception. I stumbled backward, my foot catching a warped plank, and almost fell. The figure continued to advance, gliding without touching the platform, its presence bending reality itself. Minutes or hours passed, I could not tell. The fog shifted constantly, forming vague humanoid shapes that dissolved when observed directly. Whispers drifted through the air, incoherent yet insistent, carrying a weight in my skull that pressed on my thoughts. I realized with growing dread that Blackthorn Station was not merely haunted, it was aware. It observed me, studied me, and manipulated my perception. Every instinct, every rational thought, seemed to twist under the oppressive influence of the station. The station building, though mostly intact, offered no comfort. Broken windows, dust-laden floors, and warped doors gave it an abandoned air. Yet there was a sense of deliberate design, as if the structure itself had intentions. Inside, shadows moved in ways that contradicted the laws of physics. Corners stretched into darkness, light bent unnaturally, and the fog seeped in, carrying whispers and shapes with it. I understood that I was not alone. Figures lurked at the edges of perception, tall, thin, humanoid, yet grotesque. Gliding rather than walking, tilting heads in silent observation. I tried to leave. Every exit I attempted led me back to the same spot on the platform, facing the figures. My rational mind tried to process it. Hallucination, stress, exhaustion. But the photographs I reviewed showed distortions, elongated shadows, and faint figures that had no basis in reality. The station was bending space around me, trapping me within an environment that obeyed its own rules. I ran along the platform, desperately searching for a path to freedom, only to find the fog thickened ahead, folding space so that I ended up where I started. Facing the figures once more, the air grew heavier, almost viscous. Breathing became difficult. The whispers intensified, forming a chant that resonated directly within my mind. I could not distinguish between my own thoughts and the station's communication. Every step I took was measured, observed, catalogued. I understood that Blackthorn Station thrived on fear, awareness, and the disorientation of intruders. The figures glided silently closer, their forms almost featureless. Yet each carried an expression of attention, of intent. I stumbled into the station building, seeking refuge. The interior was warped, like a dream, with walls stretching impossibly and shadows moving independently of any light source. The figures outside remained at the edges of visibility, gliding in silent observation. I pressed myself against a wall, exhausted, heart racing, unable to tear my eyes away. The fog seeped through cracks, curling around my legs, rising toward my chest, carrying with it whispers that seemed to extract memory, twisting it into abstract sensations of fear and helplessness. Time became meaningless. Minutes stretched into hours, or perhaps days. I could not tell. My body ached, yet my mind remained trapped in the station's awareness. I began to notice patterns. The gliding figures moved with rhythm. The fog pulsed in response. The shadows aligned in precise angles that defied geometry. Blackthorn Station was alive, not in the ordinary sense, but as a conscious, patient entity. It manipulated perception, folded space, and ensnared consciousness. At some point, I saw the faintest suggestion of a train, headlights glowing in the distance, but no sound of wheels, no vibration, no weight. The figures aligned with the phantom train, gliding along the platform in perfect synchronization. I realized with horror that the station was conducting a ritual, bending reality around an imaginary event to trap intruders within its awareness. I ran, desperate, sliding along warped rails, yet the platform seemed endless, looping back on itself. Each attempt to escape returned me to the same point, facing the gliding figures, the endless fog, and the low resonant chant inside my skull. Exhaustion forced me to collapse. I pressed myself against a warped bench, trembling, hoping for a respite. The figures did not attack, did not advance further. They merely observed, patient, silent, and unblinking. I understood then that they were extensions of the station, guardians of its boundaries, embodiments of its awareness. My consciousness strained against the weight of the station, struggling to remain intact while being evaluated, tested, catalogued, eventually. In the dim light of pre-dawn, the fog began to thin, the figures receding into the mist. I staggered, outside, gasping, trembling, and ran toward the nearest road, away from Blackthorn Station. The oppressive weight lifted, but the memory, the awareness, remained. The photographs revealed the impossible, elongated shadows. Figures bending reality, mist-forming humanoid shapes that had no physical source. I realized that Blackthorn Station was alive, aware, patient, and eternal, and that anyone who entered would become part of its observation, its ritual, its impossible geometry. Even now, I follow reports from local explorers, noting patterns that echo my experience: gliding figures, thick sentient fog, and distorted photographs. Blackthorn waits, silently, for the next intruder willing to venture after dark. To witness its awareness, to become tethered to its existence. I do not know if I will ever return, but I carry the memory like a shadow within my own mind, a constant reminder that some places are not merely abandoned, but alive, conscious, and hungry. Let's move to our 11th story. I had always been drawn to isolated places, locations abandoned and forgotten by time, places whispered about in fearful tones by the locals. So when I first heard of Ravenmore Station, I felt a mix of skepticism and intrigue. The station had been closed for decades, surrounded by overgrown tracks and dense forest. Yet rumors persisted, sightings of figures lingering on platforms, trains appearing at night without origin or destination, travelers disappearing without trace. Most dismissed these tales as superstition, but as a paranormal investigator, I knew that folklore often had roots in something real, even if distorted. The journey to Ravenmore Station took me along winding forest roads, where fog curled between ancient trees like living tendrils. As I approached the station, I noticed the unnatural silence that blanketed the area. Even the usual nocturnal creatures were absent. The station itself was a relic: crumbling platforms, shattered windows, and rails barely visible beneath moss and weeds. I stepped onto the platform, flashlight in hand, and immediately felt the oppressive weight of the air, damp, cold, and almost viscous. The first sensation was subtle, a prickle along the spine, but soon it grew into a profound dread, as if the station itself were aware of my presence. I set up my equipment and began photographing the platform. The first images seemed normal, capturing the decay and isolation, but then a shadow appeared at the far end of the tracks. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but it remained an impossible figure, unnaturally tall and thin, limbs bending at strange angles. Its face was obscured by long dark hair, and even as I raised my camera to photograph it, it seemed to bend the light around itself, appearing and disappearing intermittently. My pulse quickened. Something about the figure suggested awareness, intelligence, and a malevolent patience. I called out, my voice trembling. But only the echoes of my words returned, distorted and warped. The fog shifted around the figure, thickening and curling as though drawn to its presence. Slowly, it began to glide toward me, silent and deliberate. Every instinct screamed to flee, but my fascination anchored me. I raised my camera and snapped multiple photographs, trying to document the impossible. But each image revealed distortions, elongated shadows, vague shapes that seemed to defy physical reality. Minutes passed, or perhaps hours, I could not tell. The platform seemed to stretch, folding upon itself in ways my mind could not comprehend. Additional figures began to emerge from the fog, gliding with unnatural grace, tilting their heads as though observing me. Panic surged, but reasoning was ineffective against the oppressive awareness that filled the station. I felt trapped, tethered to the platform by the consciousness of Ravenmore Station itself. I retreated into the station building, a fragile sanctuary of broken walls and shattered glass. Inside, shadows moved independently of the dim light sources, corners stretching into impossible angles. The fog crept through cracks and broken windows, curling like serpents around the walls and floors. I pressed myself against a wall, trying to breathe steadily, but the whispers began. At first indistinct, they soon coalesced into phrases, unintelligible, yet unmistakably directed at me. The station was communicating, probing my mind, testing my sanity. I tried to escape, moving toward what I thought were exits, but every path led back to the same spot on the platform. Facing the gliding figures and the endless fog, my mind strained to rationalize the impossible. But the photographs provided proof, or perhaps further illusion. Faces that should not exist appeared in the mist. Shadows bent against the laws of physics, and light behaved inconsistently, revealing shapes only when glanced at indirectly. Ravenmore Station was bending reality, folding space, and tethering me to its awareness. The fog thickened further, rising almost like water, carrying with it whispers that resonated inside my skull. I realized that the station was feeding on my fear, my attention, my consciousness. The gliding figures moved closer in synchronized rhythm, their movements precise, measured, and deliberate. I was overwhelmed by the sensation of being studied, catalogued, and assessed. Each breath felt like a battle, each heartbeat, a drum, echoing in the chamber of the station's sentient awareness. Hours, or perhaps an eternity passed. I stumbled toward a broken stairway leading down to the tracks, hoping for escape. The figures hovered at the edges of visibility, the fog thickening to conceal their forms. Every step I took seemed to fold space, leading me back to where I had started. I realized then that escape was not merely difficult. It was impossible. The station existed in layers, a reality that intersected with mine yet obeyed its own rules. As exhaustion overtook me, I collapsed onto a warped bench, trembling. The figures did not advance further. They merely observed, patient and silent. The fog shifted and pulsed as if alive, and I understood that Ravenmore Station was more than a physical location. It was a conscious entity, an ancient intelligence that manipulated perception and ensnared the unwary. The low, resonant hum that had accompanied the station since my arrival intensified, vibrating directly into my consciousness. Eventually, in the faint light of pre-dawn, the fog began to dissipate, and the figures retreated into the mist. I staggered outside, gasping for air, and ran along the tracks toward the nearest road. Only then did the oppressive weight lift, leaving me physically unharmed but mentally scarred. The photographs revealed impossible anomalies, elongated shadows, faintly glowing figures, and warped perspectives that could not exist in reality. Ravenmore Station had marked me, tethered me, and left me with a permanent awareness of its presence. Since that night, I avoid the forests surrounding Ravenmore Station, yet I cannot ignore the lingering memory. Sometimes, when fog rolls across platforms or train tracks in distant towns, I hear the whispers, feel the oppressive weight of awareness, and am reminded of the station's patient vigilance. It waits, silently, for the next intruder willing to step into its domain, to witness its gliding figures, its sentient fog, and its impossible geometry. And I know, with certainty, that anyone who enters after nightfall will be tethered to the station's observation, trapped in a loop of terror and awareness, just as I nearly was. Ravenmore Station is eternal, patient, and intelligent. It exists beyond the boundaries of physical law, manipulating space, perception, and thought to ensnare the curious. The gliding figures, the folding platforms, the sentient fog, all are manifestations of the station's consciousness, extensions of its will. Those who enter are observed, catalogued, and occasionally return to the world outside, carrying the memory of its impossible presence. The whispering fog, and the unrelenting sense of being watched. I document this story not to frighten, but to warn. Ravenmore Station is not a place to explore lightly. The photographs, the accounts, the experiences of others who have ventured there, all point to the same conclusion. The station is alive, aware, and patient. Curiosity is dangerous here, and even those who survive may carry the mark of the station in their minds forever. Even now, I feel the faint tug of its awareness in quiet moments. A fog rolling across the landscape, a shadow that lingers too long. A whisper carried on the wind, all reminders that Ravenmore Station is out there, waiting eternal and hungry for the next observer to fall into its fold. I know I was lucky to escape physically, but mentally, part of me remains tethered, a silent witness to the station, es eternal be. Let's move to our 12th story. The first time I heard about Hollowgate Station, it was from a retired railway worker who spoke in hushed tones at the edge of a pub table. He warned me never to go there at night. Once the fog rolls in, he said, the station takes its own passengers, and they never leave. As a journalist fascinated by haunted places, such warnings intrigued me rather than deterred me. Hollowgate Station had been closed for decades, yet reports of sightings, strange lights, and inexplicable noises persisted. The stories were unsettling, but consistent. People vanishing, ghostly trains appearing from nowhere, and eerie figures wandering platforms. I wanted proof, evidence that the supernatural could intersect with reality, and Hollowgate promised. The journey to Hollowgate Station took me along winding country roads, thickly lined with trees. The air felt heavier as I approached, the usual forest sounds muted, as if the entire area had been drained of life. When I first saw the station, the sense of unease intensified. It was more decayed than I expected. Boards warped and splintered, windows cracked, rails rusted and twisted. A dense fog lay over the platform, moving unnaturally, curling around posts and benches like living tendrils. The temperature dropped sharply, though it was early autumn, and the smell of wet earth, mixed with a metallic temps, filled my nose. I stepped onto the platform cautiously, flashlight in hand. Each step echoed unnaturally, though the fog swallowed the sound almost immediately. At the far end of the platform, I glimpsed movement, a tall, thin figure, standing completely still. Its face was obscured, but its gaze felt like it pierced my mind. I felt a pressure in my chest, a cold weight pressing down, and instinctively, I took a step back. The figure did not move, yet I knew it was aware of me. Every instinct screamed to leave, but I was rooted, drawn by curiosity and the subtle pull of something beyond my understanding. I raised my camera and began photographing the scene. Each flash seemed to provoke the figure, causing the fog to swirl in tighter, curling patterns. As I observed, more shapes emerged from the mist, pale, humanoid figures gliding silently along the platform. They did not walk, they hovered, limbs bending in unnatural ways, faces obscured, yet their attention was unmistakably focused on me. My rational mind tried to convince me it was an illusion, a trick of light and fog. But the photographs I took confirmed the impossible shapes and shadows that should not have existed. Elongated forms and spectral figures partially visible through the dense mist. I called out, my voice trembling, but no response came. The fog thickened, forming swirling columns around the figures as they moved closer. I realized with rising dread that Hollowgate Station was alive, in a sense I could not comprehend, aware of me, manipulating the environment, bending space and perception. The platform seemed to stretch and loop back on itself. Every step I took brought me back to the same point, facing the gliding figures. Panic surged, yet fascination anchored me, compelling me to remain despite the danger. I retreated into the station building, a fragile refuge with broken windows and warped walls. Inside, shadows moved independently of the light, corners stretched unnaturally, and the fog seeped through every crack. I pressed myself against a wall, trying to calm my racing heart. The whispers began shortly after, soft, unintelligible, yet insistent. They were not carried by the air, but seemed to resonate inside my skull, probing my thoughts. I realized that the station was testing me, interacting with my consciousness, observing my fear and reactions with deliberate intent. Time lost meaning. Minutes, hours, perhaps days passed. I could not tell. The gliding figures moved with synchronized precision, the fog pulsing as though alive. Each movement I made was measured, catalogued, assessed. I understood that Hollowgate Station thrived on observation, fear, and disorientation. Every breath was a struggle, every thought a target. My body ached, but my mind remained tethered, acutely aware of the station's sentient presence. I tried to escape once more, moving toward what I thought was the exit. The fog reacted, thickening to conceal the path, folding the environment so that I ended up back on the platform, facing the same spectral figures. My perception strained to understand the impossible geometry of the station, how it could manipulate space, time, and awareness so effortlessly. The figures hovered at the edge of visibility, emotionless, yet vigilant. I realized then that escape would require more than physical effort. I had to outthink a consciousness older and more patient than myself. Exhaustion forced me to rest against a warped bench. The fog continued to curl and pulse, carrying with it whispers that slowly became coherent phrases, warnings, admonitions, and strange riddles that seemed to resonate with parts of my memory I had never consciously known. I understood that the station had a memory of its own, an awareness accumulated over decades, or perhaps centuries, feeding on those who entered and survived long enough to perceive it. The gliding figures were extensions of this awareness, manifestations of its sentience. At some point, I saw a faint light in the distance, resembling the approach of a train. My heart leaped, hope flaring briefly, but the sound of wheels never followed. The figures aligned with the phantom train, moving in synchronization with its imagined path. I realized that Hollowgate Station could fabricate reality, creating scenarios entirely within its control, bending perception to trap and study its intruders. My rational mind was powerless. My body was tethered, my senses manipulated. Hours, or perhaps an eternity, passed in this liminal space. Every attempt at escape returned me to the same configuration: platform, fog, figures, whispers. I began to notice patterns in the stations, manipulations, sequences, rhythms, behaviors. It was aware of me, studying my reactions, testing my fear and perseverance. I realized that the station did not need to harm its intruders physically. It could trap consciousness itself, bending perception and time until the mind broke or surrendered. Eventually, the faint light of pre-dawn filtered through the dense fog. The figures receded, gliding back into the mist, leaving the platform eerily empty. I staggered onto the tracks, trembling, gasping for air. The oppressive weight lifted, but the memory remained vivid. Photographs taken during the night showed impossible phenomena: elongated shadows, spectral figures partially visible through fog, and warped perspectives defying physical laws. Hollowgate Station had marked me, tethered my awareness, and left an indelible impression on my mind. Since that night, I avoid the area entirely, yet the station's presence lingers in my thoughts. Fog rolling over distant platforms, shadows that linger too long, whispers carried by the wind, all serve as reminders of Hollowgate's patient vigilance. It waits, silently, for the next intruder, brave or foolish enough to enter, to witness its gliding figures, sentient fog, and reality-bending geometry. And I know, with certainty, that anyone who enters after dark will become part of the station's eternal observation, subjected to its manipulations, and tethered to its consciousness just as I was. Hollowgate Station is eternal, patient, and intelligent. It exists beyond the limits of physical law, manipulating space, time, perception, and thought to ensnare the curious. The gliding figures, the sentient fog, the warped architecture, all are extensions of the station's awareness, manifestations of its will. Intruders are observed, catalogued, and occasionally returned to the world outside, carrying memories of the impossible, whispers echoing in their minds, and the unrelenting sensation of being watched. I document this story as both warning and record. Hollowgate Station is not merely abandoned. It is alive, aware, and patient. Those who venture there may survive physically, but part of their consciousness may remain tethered forever, observers of the station's eternal ritual. The photographs, the testimonies, and the experiences of others all point to the same chilling truth. Hollowgate Station waits, vigilant and eternal, for the next observer willing to step into its domain and witness its impossible, terrifying reality. Even now, I feel its presence in quiet moments: a rolling fog, a shadow lingering too long, a whisper drifting on the wind. These are reminders that Hollowgate Station continues to exist, patient and aware, waiting for its next witness. I escaped physically, but my mind remains partially tethered to its eternal vigilance, forever marked by the station that manipulates perception, reality, and fear with unfathomable patience.